All right, so I actually did this presentation about a month ago over in St. Simons. The Rotary Club over there asked me to present to them what we had found so far with our investigation in Waycross. And so these are slides that were taken over for that presentation, plus I've added a few more that are more specific kind of to our area. And basically it's about the unintended consequences of what we've seen so far. So we have 30 years of history at these contaminated sites. And in Waycross, we know that there's CSX is contaminated, Atlanta Gas and Light was a contaminated site, and then we also know that 7-Out. Now 7-Out was really only a short period of time in operations from 2000 to 2004 when the EPA shut it down. So here's a map of our area. This black area here is CSX, which is 5 miles long. It's 850 acres of land. Atlanta Gas is right here, okay? And then 7-Out was actually right here. And even though this black kind of cuts off right here, the CSX property line actually goes all the way up to there. And I'm going to come back here a second. All of these blue highlights here are waterways. Okay, so there's a canal system on the south side of CSX. Then there's this creek that runs through Mary Street Park, you know, through here. Wow. And all of this goes down to the river. Then down this way, there's also a canal system. And you see this is important because this feeds into the areas out near Ruskin. And then this goes towards Kettle Creek.
Okay.
So all of these areas basically, because there's so much water, right, when we do have a lot of rain and stuff, all of this contamination from this area can flow to all different areas and parts of town. And so we've noticed that the high rainy seasons were a big problem. This right here are our recharge areas for Waycross or Ware County. And a recharge area is where the ground itself is just right to take contamination that would normally be groundwater contamination and take it down into a lower aquifer. So as you can see, there's a big recharge area right along the river. Whoops, this thing actually moves by itself. And then there's recharge areas here and here, and then out here.
Okay.
Now we had, when we first started looking at this, Greenlaw helped us a little bit. This was when Stephanie was at Greenlaw, and she hired a guy to actually evaluate for us some of the CSX documents and the Atlanta Gas documents. And from his report, which was pretty extensive, he was able to show where the groundwater plumes were. So there was this on the right is Atlanta Gas's plume. Okay, so the black area is actually Atlanta Gas, but a plume is where the contamination goes beyond their property, or it's in the groundwater in all of this area. And as you can see, the green, the red is where the contamination is higher. So it's actually off into residential areas here. And what's important, another important thing, besides it being in residential areas, is that the canal system runs right through this. So when it rains heavy and all of that stuff comes up, then it flows in the canal. On the left side here, we have CSX's groundwater plume. All of these red spots are contaminated, highly contaminated areas at CSX. The plume here, the green with the red, as you can see, it moves across the canal system over into residential areas. Now this is based off of CSX documents and Atlanta Gas documents. So that's not necessarily to say that the plume isn't further, because originally when we looked at CSX documents, they actually showed this plume coming right to the line and stopping at the canal. Well, that's not how groundwater works. It doesn't come up to a 4-foot canal and just stop just because it's, you know.
Right.
So those were in the 2000 documents. And when we asked Georgia EPD about that, they said, oh, well, they really couldn't give us an answer. But then in the 2004 documents, this is really interesting, CSX had gone and bought a lot of these properties right here. Well, as soon as they bought those properties, then all of a sudden the plume had gone past the canal.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, as long as the plume stays contained in their property, they're under less restrictions than if it goes off their property.
Yeah, I guess so.
So anyway, we feel kind of like that might be why they had all of those plumes initially coming up to the line and then all of a sudden just stopping there, because they didn't want to show it going off. This right here, this is interesting to show you. These green, kind of lime green lines right here. There's one there. And can you see where my cursor is?
Yes.
Okay, there's one here on the left, and then there's one here. Now what those are what they call horizontal remediation wells. And they take a piece of piping and they actually lay it down, they lay it down sideways. And they try to collect the water. They dig it in, it's in the ground, but they try to suck the water into this piping. And then they take it out and supposedly clean it. And then they discharge it into the canals after it's cleaned. So you can see here that there's two, but there's this big gap in between. And that's going to be important later in our conversation, that gap. Okay, so then we talk about the health of the community. If we've had 30 years, because this was a question I asked in my mind, if we've had 30 years of contamination, why all of a sudden in the last, 5 years have we had all these children who've gotten sick? And that has been something that just kind of has really bothered me. So these are just some of our children here, and not all of these are our children, because we have some that are showing up in, Brantley County, Pierce County, Glenn County's having some. But all across the board, all of these communities, all the children started getting sick about the same time. So our question was, what's happening? Okay, we took and did, in the community we had 27 people who took health screens, and from those preliminary health screens, these are all the chemicals that showed up in their body. So
wow.
Yeah, you got arsenic. Now these were common ones too. And it didn't necessarily show up in all 27 of them, but if we saw like it show up more than 4 or 5 times in a person, in people, then we considered it, okay, if it's showing up that many times, then we need to put it on the list. And so we put it on this list, and we started looking for those kind of things. And there's a Dropbox that we've got, or a Google Drive box that has all of these listed out. And we went through and pulled all the records from Atlanta Gas, CSX, and we identified which which property or which contaminated site had those particular compounds. So you can look at that. That's interesting. But here's something that we also found. So this right here, if you look at the top left-hand corner, it says radiation by year. This is the City of Waycross and Ware County's municipal water system. So we combined all of their data from their testing, and we looked at what the radiation levels. Now the blue is what they call gross radiation. Whoops. So it's gross alpha radiation levels. And you can see here in 2008 there was a peak. It went down in 2010, then it started going back up. 2011, 2012, peaked again, then it came back down. The red line is radium-226. Now it peaked a little bit, but it didn't peak up as high as the gross alpha. And it is a alpha particle. So because it's an alpha particle, and because the gross alpha was so high, we wanted to know what other type of radiation was making this peak. Okay, if it wasn't the radium-226, what was causing the peaks? We also noticed, and we correlated, the children from just Ware and Pierce County. So if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that we had one back in 2006. Then in 2010, we have one. Pierce County was 2 in 2011. Then 2012, we get, let me shrink this. We start seeing more. There was a total of 4 between the two counties. 2013, 1, 2, and then in 2015 we had 6. So we kind of looked at this peak and we said, okay, this peak seems to be influencing these childhood cancers in some way. It also is important to note that childhood cancers, there's a lapse between the time that a child is exposed and when the cancer starts to actually develop, or you develop a tumor. So with like leukemia, it's a shorter period of time. It can be 6 months to a couple of years. Lymphomas take a little bit longer to develop. Sarcomas can take, which like the rhabdomyosarcomas, can take, 3 or 4 years from their actual exposure time to develop. So it was I think it was in this one right here in 2011 when we had the first sarcoma show up. And that child, well, and I'll have to tell you this. Another reason why we included the Pierce County was because the initial children that got sick, there was like 4 of them who all of their mothers, while they were pregnant, were teachers at Ruskin Elementary.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we have to combine that data because those parents could have gotten exposed, initially while they were working. And apparently there was also, in addition to the children of parents who worked there, there were several breast cancer teachers who got breast cancer out there, and there were reported multiple miscarriages, which is all an indication that there was something, in that area at the time.
Yep.
Another thing we did was we looked at the new births. Now, and we correlated that with the exposure from the radiation. So if you look at the new births in Ware County, we were up around 500, but in 2010, it dropped down to 123. In Pierce County, it dropped down to 49. Now, this data was obtained by Dr. Herbert, I can't remember his last name, but he is a statistician, and he correlated all of this data on the new births and on these childhood cancers for us and put this together for us. So those are charts out of his information. And he got that information directly from Ware County and Pierce County's Department of Health, I guess. So the next thing we looked at is a diminished workforce, the number of disabilities. So we had increases in from 2004 to 2015. There was a 17% increase in the number of people becoming disabled. We also looked at the death rate of white women working age. Now, not elderly, all right, because they always want to throw stuff in at us, but in Ware County, we haven't had a 70% increase in the number of deaths of white women. Pierce County had 11% decrease. So we obviously see some differences between 15 years ago or 10 years ago even, and what we've experienced in the last 5 years. And through all of our records, if we look at the fact that the other contaminations were here and present, through just take into consideration that they were all here, they were all present, what made the difference? The only thing that we could find that substantially made the difference was the radiation. And so we began to do a little bit more. We began to test for radiation, and we began to find radiation in the water in Ware County. And it was noted that the type of radiation that was showing up was polonium-210 was the alpha, and then there was a type of beta radiation that was showing up that was called lead-210. But with that information, we also needed to know, had something different happened at CSX, Atlanta Gas, what could have caused this radiation, okay? Well, basically what we found out was that for the radiation to increase, and we hired a guy from Wayne State, Dr. Mark Baskaran, to help us kind of go through all the radiation type things. And he came back and said that for the radiation to increase and decrease like it did, that had to be something that was not a natural occurrence. And that is so important for everybody to understand. It was not a natural occurrence. So if it wasn't natural, what caused it? Well, we couldn't find any records at CSX or Atlanta Gas where they have reported a spill. Okay? We looked at Georgia Power, Plant Hatch. We actually did some testing because we did find a release at Plant Hatch that was like in a couple of releases, 2006, and there was one in 2011. But what they had there was a lot of tritium. So when we did our radiation testing in the water, we tested for tritium. We only found one location that had any tritium at all, and it was very, very low. So we could pretty much rule out Plant Hatch as the problem. So then we started looking at what else could it be. Well, Atlanta Gas records revealed that there was a new type of remediation that they had started. They started injecting sulfate-reducing bacteria into the groundwater. And the purpose was to clean up the other types of contamination. So, I know. So they were trying to get rid of benzene, and they had benzene pyrene and some other volatile organic compounds. But they were injecting this sulfate-reducing bacteria once a month from 2006 to 2007, and then they came back in 2011, or sometime between 2010 and 2011, and did more injections. Well, and those are some records from, those are actually Atlanta Gas records right there that you're looking at. Anyway, those, and this is actually CSX record here. CSX started having increases in iron bacteria. Okay, so now we've got sulfate reducing bacteria being injected. If you combine iron, which CSX had, and bacteria, then you get iron bacteria. So now we have sulfate reducing bacteria and iron bacteria floating around in our groundwater. Well, bacteria stirs up radiation and some kinds of heavy metal. So basically, the sulfate reducing bacteria and the iron bacteria cause the radiation to release from sediment and get up into the water column. So we were all started drinking it. And along with that and the contamination comes other forms of bacteria and viruses and parasites. So this is an article that talked about parasites are a byproduct of other types of contamination.
Wow.
Radiation is 10 times more toxic than the original chemicals they started to clean up.
Yeah.
10 times. Polonium is what the Russians used to kill Yasser Arafat with. It's what they used to poison spies with, because it's so hard to detect and it takes such a very small amount of it to make it, you know, to hurt somebody. But in addition to that, look at this. Now this is a report. This is in all of the health data that the federal government goes by. If you combine polonium-210 and benzene pyrene, which we had, okay, and iron oxide, it increases the toxicity of all of them by 1,000%.
What?
Yeah, by 1,000%. So you take just a little bit of each one of those. And now what's interesting about this study is they took lifetime, see, they have what they call lifetime limits. They have yearly limits that we're allowed to drink, and then they have lifetime limits, okay?
Right.
So this study was based on using lifetime limits. And based on that study, the toxicity was 1,000 times worse when you combine those three together. This are all the different symptoms that just low dose radiation will cause. So we're talking about, I mean, there's one scientist looked at our stuff and he said, I won't go on the record because I'm not hired by anybody, but he looked at our water records and just all the different stuff, because we had lots of water records. Even EPD came in and did some, but they would say, oh, well, they're below regulation limits and stuff like that. Regardless of whether they were below radiation limits, when you've got so many of them, the scientist said, there's almost no disease that your community could not have.
Wow.
I want to talk just a second and explain the difference between what PCI is and MCL and millirooms, because this is important, I think. I think everybody needs to learn as much as they can about this. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to, we're not going to fix the problem if people don't understand it. So PCI is picocuries, and this is PCI is specific to radiation, but it's picocuries in a liter of water. So it measures how much water, how much radiation is actually in water. So when you see picocuries, it's telling you how much of that radiation is in the water. MCL is the maximum contamination level that the government says is safe in our drinking water. Okay? So they'll say like 1 PCI is the highest MCL. So that means that 1 picocurie per liter in water is the maximum amount that anybody should drink. Millirems, this MREM, is the dose to the body or the organ. So in other words, if I drink 1 PCI, I'm going to get a certain amount of millirems to my body from the radiation. Okay? Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
All right. So the individual standard, when they're developing MCLs, all right, they base that off of 4 millirems per year of exposure. So if they say a person like radium-226, okay, and radium-228 have a combined MCL of 5, but the individual exposure to equal 4 millirems of just radium-226 is somewhere around 3 PCIs per liter. So if you had more than 3, you've already reached that 4 millirems. They have a lifetime exposure of, I've got 120 there, but it should be 280. It's 280 millirems is your lifetime exposure. It's 4 millirems times 70 years. Okay? They have just recently been talking about this proposed protective action goal. So in case of a nuclear accident, because this all started after Japan's incident, they thought, okay, well, what's the maximum anybody's allowed to get in 1 year? At first, they came back and said 75 millirems. Now they've changed that up to 100, okay, in the first year for infants, children, and pregnant women. And they've said something like 500 for adults. But after that first year of exposure, it had to go back down to the 4 millirem per year exposure. Okay? That's the guidelines they've come up with. Now, this is what ours is currently. So Ware County, gross alpha, this right here is the MCL. 15 PCI is the MCL for gross alpha. Radium 226 is 3 PCI. Polonium is 0.7, okay? Oops. That's going to equal your 4 millirems. Uranium is 30 UGs per liter. So in Ware County, we had, this is what the gross alpha was. The radium was 0.667. The polonium was 1.06. And uranium was 12.65. Now, also, though, if you look down on here in the underneath down here, you'll see it Ware County had a lead-210 at 0.995. If we added up all of these, okay, we would come up with 14.6 milliremes for Ware
Wow.
County's water.
Mm.
For Waycross's water, when you add up everything, you come up with 12.8. Homerville, which we didn't test all of these other things here, so there's a lot of stuff that's missing. We were at 8.8. Brantley was, but this will kind of give you an idea. So on the polonium, Brantley was coming in at 0.06 and Glenn County was coming in at 0.006 for polonium. So obviously this is not a naturally occurring thing.
Mm.
Now, on top of that, you can see down here under Ware County at the bottom down here, we look at arsenic and stable lead. We had stable lead coming in at 34 in some places in Ware County's water system, and arsenic coming in at 6. I want to make sure too, Cindy, everybody needs to understand this. We've spent about $10,000 doing testing because it took us a lot of money trying to just figure out what was the things that were causing the, that could potentially be causing the worst problems.
I can see that.
Yeah. And anyway, but when we took these water samples, they weren't taken at the well location. They were taken at sick people's homes. So where we knew we had sick children, that's where we took these readings.
Okay.
But at locations close to the wells, they could have double or triple that amount, because as it flows to those, from the well to those people's homes, a lot of it will sit in the pipes. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So people who live closer to wells are in much more danger than people who are further away. Now, children are always going to be more sensitive to lower levels of radiation than adults. So it goes small children, and then women that are not bigger framed, and then your men, because it's all body weight, right? So if we're all drinking the same amount, but if you take the same amount and you put it in a little baby's body, I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
you got the picture? So anyway, it destroys them. We went back to figure the annual limit on radiation. If we have the 4 milliremes and the lifetime is 280 milliremes, we went back and figured what our past exposure would have been.
Yeah.
Okay, so back in 2008, our exposure would have been about 127 milliremes per year. If we added them all together, since 2008, we've had about 923 milliremes.
We don't really have a chance, do we?
Well, we do, but only if we're gonna, there are things that can be done. That's one of the things that is so frustrating about this, is because there are some things that we can do to help the health of the people, right? One of the things is people might be getting a lot of bacterial infections, because just like in the environment, the body produces this bacteria to help eat away at these metals and stuff, right? Well,
Yeah.
but the bacteria can cause you to be releasing too many of these metals and things into your bloodstream, which causes just total havoc. There's all kinds of things that we can do. There is treatment, but people need to be getting it. If they're not getting heart disease, we're definitely shortening our life if we don't do something.
Yeah. Yeah. I do not understand, you know what I'm saying, the scientific, that, but you explaining it where, you know, where I can better understand. Where maybe they thought they knew all this stuff, the CSX and Gaslight, knew it was in there, and they thought they were trying to help, and you know, blah blah, how that goes. But now, I mean, we're past all that. So the question I want to ask you is probably what is on the screen right now that you're going to tell me about.
Well, okay, so this is the warning. These are the warnings that we're seeing in the paper. This was talking about cryptosporidium, which is a parasite. It comes when contaminated waters. That was in Ware counties. Then you'll see in Waycross and Ware counties things. You'll see things like contamination that may be present. And you'll see micro, you know, down at the bottom you'll see radiation contamination.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that we need everybody to do. Everybody who's sick needs to get in these two registries. The adult registry of Erin Brockovich. Adults need to register, and you need to put the children's information in there. The reason why is because this is not just happening in our community. This sulfate reducing bacteria that they're injecting, this is a new technology, and they're doing it in Glenn County, and they're doing it in Valdosta, and they're doing it all over the country. So this needs to stop. You know, they need to figure out, they tested 4 different types of sulfate reducing bacteria, or 2 different types, and then 2 different types of something else. They need to get a handle on that. Second thing we need to do is we need to get all the children who are sick, any kind of birth defects, any kind of miscarriages, diabetes, cancer, anything, into this registry. It's called Birth Defects Research for Children. Because if we can get people to get into these registries, this one specifically looks at, and with the permission of the parents and all, after they, you know, gather up all the information and try to say, okay, this is the problem here, this is the one that we need to focus on, you know, this is causing it to move into this, then they can better look at ways to help us, physically help us.
Yeah.
And then other suggestions for the community. You know, if people aren't healthy, then we're not going to have good job growth. So we need to quit trying to separate in our mind that it's one or the other, because it's not. We got to have a good environment to have good job growth. And we have to have good job growth to have a good environment. Whoops.
Yeah.
And we cannot rely on, I don't think our community needs to be relying on mandated testing. We need to step up, and we need to say, you know what, we're going to test these. We're going to find out, you know, we're going to test them once a quarter. If we already know it's there. Maybe not even, I mean, just if they need to verify it, they need to go verify it. But then they need to put some systems on there that will take this out. For instance, reverse osmosis. It's expensive, but it'll save a lot of sickness in our community. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, huh?
Wow.
I just can't, and there's nothing but reverse osmosis that's going to pull this out. We also have high levels of radon showing up. Like communities are required, if it's over 300, to have radon reduction program in place. Ours in Waycross water was 434.
And so do they have the remediation in place for that?
I don't know. I don't think so. And if they do, it's
Okay.
not working sufficiently, because otherwise we shouldn't be having, it shouldn't be up around 434. We've got to get a handle on where this bacteria is coming from. I want to go back to this real quick. We need to call federal and state representatives too before I leave this page and request funding for our water, for this bacterial remediation. We need to understand this more. I came across some articles that show that the bacteria remediation can actually transform standard metals to radioactive nuclides. So it was a new discovery made back last year, which might be influencing this too. But I want to go back up here to this other thing real quick, and I know you got to go. But we have made some headway. For instance, CSX, they've got this thing called an air stripping system. And it basically, to clean that water that they pull out of the ground, they would put it into this like machine, and the machine would like blow the water up in the air and then put a fan on it, and the fan was supposed to cause the chemicals to separate from the water. But on that system, it has a very important part. It was called an air stripper. So there had to be something that it's like a carbon filter that caused the separation. CSX has taken that carbon filter off.
Oh, good Lord.
So what they were doing was just blowing that up in the air. Well, that was one of the first things that we got changed. They got that back on, supposedly. Now, I haven't seen it back on, but supposedly it's back on. The second thing, now this is pretty dang interesting here, because people come back and say, oh, that radiation is natural. Remember what the scientists said, that radiation does not go up and down like that. That does not happen in the natural thing. The second thing everybody needs to know is we complained about the site. Well, CSX came in and put another horizontal well right here to close up this gap.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Well, as soon as they did, well, I shouldn't say as soon as they did. I'm just going to say, in correlation with them putting another horizontal well in here, there was a well down here to the south of CSX. So this is out in Gilchrist Park well. As soon as they put that in, the radiation levels in the Gilchrist Park well dropped to almost nothing. But
wow.
The rest of the wells, the ones downtown and the ones like in Emerson Park, they all stayed high. So maybe a solution is CSX needs to put these horizontal wells around this whole dang whole dang piece of property. That might be a solution. So anyway, those are my suggestions, my comments. What other questions do you have? Tell me what I did.
Well, no, it was good, like I said, in the math, but I understand now what I've been seeing on Facebook. Y'all talk about the cocktails, how everything gets, messed up, and then when we get a big rain or whatever, and everything runs together, and it's a very complicated formula.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know, that the end of everything is money because it costs money, but if the state, I don't know how they feel about it. I know you've been through all this. If they are just going to keep the minimum requirements for their testing, then it looks like the city and the county, for whatever reason, should or would have to, pick up the slack and protect everybody because they know what's going on.
Well, I agree, but until more people understand what, what we're talking about and what has happened here, they're not, we've got to get more people in the community understanding it. And one of the good things that these corporations do is if they can separate the people who are finding the problem and trying to correct it from people who are sick or from the community itself by trying to cause divisions, then nobody wants to work together, right? So
Right.
we can't let them do that. We've got to say, no, we all may not be perfect. You guys may not be perfect down at City Hall either, but we are not going to stop until we figure this out, until we get this problem solved. That's what I think needs to be. That needs to be our attitude.
Yeah, because I don't, we might can help the county and City Hall understand things. But they should be the ones to demand, right, that CSX get their water thing here cleaned up, because if they're having to pay for stuff they know that's going on over there, right?
Right.
That's the cause of it, then maybe the city and the county are going to have to. But there again, there's that. They're like the biggest employer here, right?
Well, they are the biggest employer here, but what these companies need to understand is,
Yeah.
Sick people, their employees are getting sick. I mean,
Yeah.
there were over 400 suits filed against CSX for various environmental problems in the last, I don't know, I think it was like 2000 we looked at. 400 suits. I mean, I remember when I first moved up there, I used to hear it was a joke. And I was thinking, these poor employees, actually I was sympathetic to CSX. I was thinking, they're really just taking advantage of that company. I had no clue what those employees have gone through.
Wow.
CSX needs to be, they need to man up is what they need to do. All of these companies do. Nobody wants to overregulate them or anything like that, but they can't, you can't have one business come in and allow one business to destroy 1,000 businesses because other people in the community can't function, can't work, can't think. Their employees are sick all the time. Their medical insurance that you pay as a small business goes out the roof because your employees are sick because of a company down the street. I mean, the reason why Ware County's insurance rates are so high is right here. That affects every single person in Ware County, regardless of whether they live downtown or whether they live, out in the country.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to stop this recording